startup marketing and PR can be really, really tough, especially when it's likely that you're working to a minimal budget and trying to nail down who your audience is really, really tough, and occasionally assuming that it's everyone. Thankfully, we have Simon here to help you. Simon Vincent founded innovative marketing strategy company ex-CMO in 2018, having spent 15 years in leading London agencies working with global brands. With a fresh approach and a host of innovative marketing and brand development tools, Simon applies his marketing expertise to startups and scale-ups, working with passionate business leaders whose ambition matches his own. Simon empowers them to communicate what makes them extraordinary and communicate extraordinarily. In his talk, What Your Customer Sells is Not Necessarily What Your Customers Buy, he will help you find the real problems your customers have. Please welcome to the stage, Simon.
Find out who you are and do it on purpose. The advice of one of the leading preeminent philosophers of our time, Dolly Parton. And she should know, right? Like, there are very few people who can walk into a room and before they've even opened their mouths, let alone sung, you know exactly what you're going to get with Dolly Parton. But here's the thing. You don't have to be as larger than life as Dolly Parton to be able to make an impact on people when you walk into a room. In fact, studies have shown that it takes us all roughly a tenth of a second, 100 milliseconds, to make judgments on the people that we meet. And these are not just superficial judgments about how attractive they are. These are actual judgments on their character. So we actually believe, when we meet people, that within a tenth of a second, we can make judgments on how likable they are, how trustworthy they are, how aggressive they are, how competent they are. All of that within 1/10 of a second. And actually, the same studies talk about the idea that even if you extend the amount of time that you give people to, let's say, 3 seconds, we don't tend to change our minds too much about what we think about that person. It hasn't escaped my notice that I've literally come up onto a stage here today to give you guys a talk, and yet it's interesting that in reality, you guys might have made your minds up about me around about a minute and a half ago, right? So how do we maximize this, right? How do we make the most of this? How do we, if we're going to be judged within the first tenth of a second when we meet people, how do we make the most of it? Now, as a marketer, you'll expect me to say branding, right? Branding is the one thing where you can show up depending on what the t-shirt is you're wearing, the watch you have on your wrist, the car that you drive, all of these sorts of things. They will convey signals to other people about who you are and what you do. And that is a useful shortcut. In fact, I really like the quote from Kevin Simler where he talks about cultural imprinting. He's a writer. He defines it like this. Cultural imprinting is the mechanism whereby an ad, rather than trying to change our minds individually, instead changes the landscape of cultural meanings, which in turn changes how we are perceived by others when we use a product. So whether you drink Corona, Heineken, or Budweiser, that says something about you. However, you aren't in control of that message. It just sits there out in the world, having been imprinted on the broader culture by an ad campaign. It's then up to you to decide whether you want to align yourself to it. You want to be seen as a chill person? Then bring Corona to a party. Okay, so branding matters. Fair enough. Nothing new there. I would extend it slightly to be talking about the product that you're selling as well. So if I pick up on Kevin's example there, where he talks about the different types of beers, I would suggest that even the decision to drink beer, as opposed to any other type of alcoholic beverage or non-alcoholic beverage, that also says something about you. So we don't need to labor the point about, the sort of cultural associations around drinking a vodka martini, perhaps shaken, not stirred, choosing to drink champagne over Prosecco, or even the reverse snobbery that comes with drinking real ale. Okay, so brand matters, product matters. These things have a disproportionate effect in 1/10 of a second on how people talk about you, how people see you, how people think about who you are. People understand that, some people understand that, but brands really understand that, and the most successful brands really understand that as well. I wanted to give you an example of a brand that does this really well, and I wanted to make it relevant to this. So I've picked on one of the most famous examples of a UK startup, and I want to tell you a story about them. I'm going to take you back to 2008. We're at Chicago O'Hare Airport. And James Watt is eating an apple that he's just managed to trade for a pin badge of his fledgling company, UK-based beer maker called Brewdog. He's traded for this apple because he's told the staff there at the airport that his Scottish bank cards don't work in US ATMs. So that's the excuse he's used as to why he needs to trade. But in reality, he's pretty convinced that actually he doesn't have enough money to be able to afford a proper meal. And then it's confirmed. So he sits there, he reads his emails, and the message comes through from his accountant: Brewdog is technically insolvent, and you are obliged to cease trading. Let me take you back a couple of weeks before that. The decision was made that Brewdog want to export their beer for the first time. So they line up with a US-based importer. They send it across the Atlantic. But unfortunately, a problem with the refrigeration meant that essentially his beer had been cooked rather than cooled all the way from Scotland to LA. That doesn't make for good tasting beer. In fact, it tasted so bad that the importer has refused to pay James and his co-founder Martin Dickey the £30,000 that he'd promised them. Hence, they don't have any money. So he's sitting there in this airport and he's trying to work out how he's going to raise some money. Remember, it's 2008. We're in the middle of a recession, right? So banks and VCs are not particularly in the mood to be able to give money to even good companies, let alone unreliable ones. So Brewdog may have been able to convince you at that time that they could organize the proverbial piss-up in a brewery. But if you can't prove that you can keep your beer cool, that's a slightly other issue. So he comes up with the idea of crowdfunding, which in 2008 wasn't really a thing, but when he's in the air, he's kind of writing this 2-page business proposal that he titles Equity for Punks. And I'm not giving away any spoilers or spoilers here, there, but suffice to say, it was a success, right? So a couple of months later, he's raised £750,000. It's enough to keep the business going. They're so successful with it that in actual fact, they've raised money several times since, and they've now brought in more than £65 million through crowdfunding alone into Brewdog. And of course, as we all know, it started out as 2 blokes in a shed in Glasgow, or in Scotland, in 2007, and 10 years later, they're a unicorn. They're worth $1 billion, primarily off the back of doing crowdfunding. But what was it that influenced the customers in Brewdog to bail out a failing company that the banks and the VCs weren't willing to back? And my answer to that would be personality. It wasn't advertising. Remember, James Watt has gone on record as saying he'd rather set fire to his money than spend it on advertising. So it wasn't TV ads, it wasn't out of home, they didn't spend all that budget on that sort of stuff. Instead of pushing their message onto people, they pulled their customers in. They did amazingly creative, personality-filled marketing. So things like, they called their products things like Tactical Nuclear Penguin. They drove a tank through the city of London to announce that they had a bar there. They even, in the really early days, would write on the bottom of their invoices to their suppliers, if you don't pay us on time, we won't be able to feed our dog. So please either pay on time or send dog biscuits in the post. So this rebellious, funny, provocative tone of voice, personality, was what people associated with. That's what made people feel passionate about them. People related to them. They looked at Brewdog and they said, this is my kind of humor, this is my kind of company. I'm willing to put my money where my mouth is. I'm willing to invest in this company to be a part of that. So personality is the key. And I would say that that's probably always been the case, but it's been even more the case in the last 10, 20, 30 years perhaps. And the reason for that is this. You'll all be familiar with the 4 Ps of marketing: product, place, price, and promotion. Well, traditionally, this is how we marketers would decide that we would differentiate products and get you the sort of the airtime that you needed. Problem is that with modern technology, no company can compete on product, place, price, and promotion anymore. So if you want to be the cheapest, let's say, you want to compete on price, well, somebody else somewhere else in the world will make it for a fraction of the price pretty quickly. You think that you're the easiest or the fastest way to get hold of your product because you're on the high street? Well, Amazon will sell it to you in 1 click and sometimes deliver it to you in seconds. No, in the age of the internet, the only P of marketing that matters is personality. And when you've studied brands like I have in terms of the marketing and the personalities that they have, what you realize actually is that all of the successful brands have this personality. They all embody a different type of personality. And this type of personality that they have actually ends up being a guide personality. And the idea of the guide comes from Donald Miller. He talked about how, in his book, Building a Story Brand, how principle one is that your customer is the hero and you are the guide. But what Donald Miller didn't tell us is that there are different types of guides. Think about it in your own life, the people who inspire and guide you, right? You have different types of people. You might have a mentor for business. You might have a coach for athletic things. You have your parents who look after you. You may have children who inspire you in different ways. And they're all bringing different, what I would refer to, or what Maslow would refer to as self-fulfilling needs. And so when you realize that you're a guide to your customers, and when you realize that there are these different self-fulfilling needs, what you realize is that actually that opens up content for you into a variety of different ways. Let me give you an example. This is an advert for Airbnb. And what Airbnb realized really early is that what your company sells is not what your customer buys. What your company sells is not what your customer buys. Think about this image here. What Airbnb sells is rooms. Places to stay. But their room is not in this picture at all. What they are selling you is not in that picture. It is the frame of the picture, quite literally. What the customer buys, in this case, is Paris, the Eiffel Tower, food, wine, music, artistry, the time spent alone to get their head together. That's what your customer is buying when they're giving their money over to Airbnb. They're selling adventure. They're selling exploration. They're selling creativity. These are the things that their customers are buying when they do business with Airbnb. But this isn't the only thing that you can sell. So some more examples. Nike are the coach. That's the guide that they are. So they're giving you motivation. That's what they sell. They're the motivation to just do it or believe in something even if it means sacrificing everything. If they're the coach, well, Coca-Cola are the cheerleader, right? They're there to make you feel good, to bring you together with people, to bring the best out of you. That's what Coca-Cola does. Dove, for example, is the caregiver. So they're there to support you, to look after you, to push you, to stand up for you. And if Dove are the caregiver, the parent, then Brewdog are the raucous older sibling, the one who's able to push the boundaries and get away with things that, maybe the man doesn't want you to get away with. Okay, so what we've done is we've established that we have to be a guide, and we have established that the different ways in which we can be a guide. Now what we need to do is understand who our customer is and how they're going to interact with the guide. What is it that they need psychologically from a guide that we can then answer for, right? Now, fortunately, we can look to a variety of different psychometric tests here. You'll be familiar with some of them. Myers-Briggs type indicator, DISC modeling, talent dynamics, all sorts of different things like this. What all of these models fundamentally typically have in common is they split human beings into 4 different parts, 4 different types. For simplicity's sake, I'll use the example of the red, blue, and green, yellow types, which was made famous by Thomas Erickson in his book Surrounded by Idiots, because it's a structure that a lot of people know. Very simply, if you don't, he talks about red people being very driven, very opinionated, maybe a bit rebellious. Blue people are very structured, very analytical, thirsty for knowledge. Green people are warm, kind, and compassionate. And yellow people are outgoing, gregarious, and fun. Well, if you can find out what type of personality your customer is psychologically, then you can start to understand how you can be the right guide for them. And you can start to structure your content accordingly. So let's take the example of copy that you might use in your ad. Well, a different call to action would work differently on a different type of customer. If you put, for example, buy now on the end of your advert, well, that might work for a red person. A red person, naturally a little bit more instinctive, willing to follow their gut, willing to just go ahead and do it. A red person might be likely to click on a buy now button on your advert. But if your target customer is blue, if they're analytical, if they're cautious, if they're a bit introverted, then they're going to be more careful about clicking on a link that says buy now. You might want to use something a bit softer, a bit less pushy, something like find out more. But it doesn't just apply to language. It also applies to imagery. So if you put an image, think about the Coca-Cola example earlier. If you put an image out there that's full of young people having fun, spending time together, bright colors, etc., that's naturally going to appeal to a gregarious, outgoing yellow. But by contrast, if you were to create a video that focuses on intimate relationships between two people, that's maybe muted in colors, that maybe has ambient music in the background, that's going to be far more effective with a more introverted, more reserved green. Okay, so we now know who our customers are and we know how we're guiding them. But why is this important? Why is this important right here and right now? A lot of this stuff has been covered in marketing before, but it is even more pressing right here, right now, and you've already heard this word a number of times today. It's because of AI. Who here is familiar with that image? Anybody seen that before? So this image is by the photographer Boris L. Dagson, but it's not a photograph. It's an image that was created entirely by AI. And it's not just any AI image. It's actually an AI image that was so good, it convinced a panel of judges to believe it was a photograph. And it's not just any old photograph as far as they were concerned. It was an award-winning photograph. This literally won the prize for the Sony Photography Award, World Photography Award. So these judges who really know what they're talking about, who understand good photography, who've seen all these different entries, they awarded this the best photography in that competition. Why did they do that? They did it because, presumably, it meant something to them. It resonated. It made them feel something. It made them question something or think about the world in a different way. They did it because they admired the technical setup of the image, the composition of it, what's in the background, what's in the foreground, the lighting, the style, the tone, the position of the camera. Well, here's the interesting thing. All of those things were prompted by L. Dagson. He was the one who made all of the choices about what he thought would make for the most effective image. He gave the AI the prompts that said, this is what I want to create and this is why I want to create it. And so this is the end. This is the beginning of the end, right? This is now, we've all used ChatGPT, and when we use it, it's rubbish. It creates bland, boring, ordinary content. When Boris L. Dagson does it, he wins awards. So he's used all of his years of experience to be able to codify what makes for an effective picture, effective piece of art, and he's come up with this piece of art, and it's won an award. So the robots are cracking the code, right? And for us as marketers, this is horrible news, right? Like, a lot of people are really scared about this. It's going to put content writers and copywriters and designers and everybody else out of business. But actually, here's the thing. If we can understand the codes, if we can do like what Boris L. Dagson did, and we can understand the codes of what makes our content effective, what makes it useful, then we can actually we can still guide the robots. For the near term, anyway. I'm not going to try and talk about what happens in 5 or 10 years, but for the near term, we can still be in control of that. And of course, AI leads us to the ability to be able to scale, and do an awful lot more very quickly. At my company, XCMO, what we're doing is we're trying to build a model that brings all of that work together. We're trying to take the models from from the psychoanalytical packages we've talked about before. It's trying to layer on the different types of guides that we're talking about. And then it's trying to identify for our clients what kind of content we would be creating, what kind of needs we're fulfilling for our customers through identifying these, what we refer to as archetypes. In other words, what we're trying to do is help our customers discover who they are and then do it on purpose. Thank you.